Great. Well, I'm Kath Kirkwood. I'm the Secretary of Hope Cohousing. And this is Mark Smith.
I'm one of the directors of Hope Cohousing.
So we'll just plow into our presentation and then give you more details later. So we're pleased to be here to tell you a bit more about the Hope Cohousing project. What we're focusing on are the challenges of working on a community-led housing project, and we thought we'd choose 3 areas: funding, building to budget, and governance. We're based in Orkney in South Ronaldsay, which you may know is the southernmost island of Orkney, and we're in the village of St Margaret's Hope, which is what's on the screen there. And these are the founder members. We began in 2018. This is us standing at our site, and we'll show you more of that later. But yeah, that's the site just on the edge of the village. We're going to show the short film as a starter, as an introduction. Several of you may have seen it because it's been part of the advertising for this event, but we thought it'd be good just to show it again and speak about some of the details of that film.
Hello, my name is Jenny. I'm from Hope Cohousing. We live in St Margaret's Hope in South Ronaldsay, one of the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. I want to talk to you about how co-housing become one of the solutions for the looming housing crisis for older people. In 2018, a group of us began talking about our housing needs as we grew older. Some of us were now living on our own in houses that were too big. Some of us were living in houses that were old and hard to maintain adequately. Some of us were living in houses that were cold and hard to heat adequately, especially given the high rates of fuel poverty in Orkney. Some of us were living in houses that were remote, and we had to depend on being able to drive. None of us were ready or needed to move into residential care, into sheltered housing, to an extra care facility, or to move in with family. All of these options would have meant having to leave our community and to give up our independence. For most of us, the most likely solution would be living at home with carers coming in, but this wouldn't address the main problems of loneliness, cold, isolation, and access. We're all of us long-term members of our community, having worked, lived and been active in it for decades. For example, all of us have been involved with this local craft cooperative. We've run our own lives, we've made decisions for ourselves, and we wanted to go on doing that. As we considered the advantage offered by co-housing, we became more and more convinced that it was the answer to our needs, with this offer of living independently in an intentional community run on cooperative lines. We have an innovative design for 5 houses and an internal street. We have eco-aware homes with low heating costs to address the high rates of fuel poverty. We have great support from our local community and from our local councillors. We have planning permission. We've had 2 tenders from local building contractors, and thanks to Orkney Islands Council, we've got this site at the heart of the village and in touch with all the community services that we need. We're now facing the final hurdle, but it's a big one: finance. Affordable rental co-housing is new here. There's no easy route to funding. We have all willingly put money in from our own resources to get the project going, but those resources are finite. We believe that investment now in senior co-housing will pay dividends later on. Time is not on our side. In the past few weeks, some of us have had health problems that highlight the difficulties of living alone or in negotiating difficult staircases. We need our new home soon if we are to fulfill our vision of active old age for ourselves and for our successors.
Okay, to give a bit of background to that film, it was made in 2021. We were asked to go to the Rural Housing Scotland annual conference, And as part of something called the Rural Voices, several groups were helped to make a video about their project. It was actually a really useful experience, a good learning time. We had to go around the village, taking little bits of film on our mobile phones and gathering photos, and then we put it all back to the filmmaker, and it came back as a perfect little film. So it was nice to get that opportunity, but also it's been really useful for us as a resource. Yes, I suppose because it dates to 2021, it's a good way to start the discussion about how long these community-led housing projects take. Actually, 2 years before that film was made, in 2019, we went up to the council offices in Kirkwall and gave a presentation about our project to councillors, council officials, representatives from Orkney Health and Care and so on. And our closing line for that presentation was something like, and we hope to be in our new homes by next Christmas. The audience was kind enough not to laugh, but I'm sure there were a few eyebrows raised in the room. Little do they know. Anyway, now we've got a much better understanding of how long these things take. And this slide is the project timeline split into 5 phases. So it's taken us about 5 years to get to where we are now, which is towards the end of phase 3. But actually, if you look at the pattern of development of other community-led housing projects, this is fairly normal, maybe even quite quick. And what we hope, of course, is that if we can just all get a few co-housing projects up and running and prove the model, then it'll become faster for other projects in the future. I mean, especially for senior co-housing, time is vital. So we've set out in the next table the various tasks associated with each phase. I think we've gone on.
We've gone on too far.
And obviously there'll be some variation for different projects, but this gives you an idea of the amount of work that each phase involves. And actually there's a lot of words there to read, but it is on our website in the resources section. The main point to note is that this is where we were in 21, where the green marker is, and this is where we are now. So now we're going on to funding. One of the major challenges for us is the issue of funding. And of course, for lots of projects, when we started discussing the plans for Hope Cohousing, we had no idea how much money was needed just even to get to the start of building. For our project, that figure has been £185,000. And we've got a breakdown here of where that money came from. Grants include, we had a feasibility grant at the beginning of £10,000 from the Islands Housing Fund. We had 5,000 from Unlimited, who offer funding and support to people with innovative ideas. And actually that money helped us employ our project coordinator, who has been invaluable. She works for us about 1 day a week. And also in this figure is a pledge from the council of £30,000 for the land. We received 2 large grants totaling close on to £100,000. The first was in January 22, and that was from Inspiring Scotland's Ideas into Action Fund.
And it had to be spent.
Yeah, so
Coming on to that. Sorry.
No interruptions. And then a couple of months later, we heard that our application for the Crown Estate Scotland had also been successful, which, I mean, it was amazing news, but slightly overwhelming. So a couple of points about the roller coaster of applying for funding. We were worried because some budget items we'd included on both applications, because of course we never thought we'd get both. But in fact, of course, all you've got to do is talk to the funders and explain that. But, you know, that's all part of the learning experience. And as Mark was saying, we also had the bizarre experience of 1 minute stressing about not being able to pay for things and not being able to move on with all the pre-construction work. And then suddenly we had £48,000 that had to be spent in less than 3 months. So a nice problem to have, but something that was quite stressful. And the point to draw attention to really is that without that money, without that funding, the project would have stalled at that stage. And the in-kind figure there covers work done by Robert Gordon University. And some of that was to do with using assistive technology and to support older people in their homes. And principally it was work done by the architect, Professor Gokai Davici, on our design. This slide shows the gaps in the funding. And the obvious point here is if the Scottish Government is going to take community-led housing seriously, it needs to meet those cost gaps that appear in each phase of the development process. So there's some money available in that phase 1. That will be the feasibility funding. But actually most projects need more than that around design and governance. That can cost a lot. And then phase 2, creating a viable project, getting a site and planning permission, again, expensive. We've actually had to go apply twice for different reasons for planning permission, and you don't realize that when you're starting these things how much all these different elements cost. Phase 3, there's no obvious source of funding for most projects, and even for a small development like ours, it's up to £100,000. Communal areas are difficult. For us, we're hoping to get money from the Islands Housing Fund for the houses, but that doesn't at the minute include anything for communal areas. So again, that's a difficult area. Other points really about that slide, escalating costs and rising interest rates that we're all well aware of, further challenges, and also the fact that each phase costs more than the last one. So it's like a steep mountain that you're climbing all the time. The next challenge for us from a funding point of view is, of course, the cost of construction. And we don't yet know what that will be, but in fact, we did an indicative tender in 2021, which pointed to a figure of around 1.5 million. Last week, after many hold-ups, I've been saying to the Cohousing Scotland group for months, I think, oh, we're about to go out to tender. That has finally happened. So tender documents have gone out to 5 local builders. And this means that with any luck, by sometime in April, they will all have come back and been evaluated, and we'll have the firmest figure yet for construction. So we're kind of looking forward to that, but also slightly dreading it because, yeah, that may be a hard figure to see. And in the meantime, we're continuing to work with our project coordinator to establish a financial package for the build. This consists of a grant application to the Scottish Government, a mortgage and other grant funding. We've got now support from the Communities Housing Trust. That's around funding and also other guidance and help with filling in the main grant form for the Scottish Government. So the next slide, we thought we should speak a bit about getting to the build on budget, because this has been, and I think is going to continue to be, a major challenge. But it also gives us a chance to show you some details about the design. So that's the design that was probably in the film. That's the 2021 picture. And then this next one is actually our current design. So following the first tender process, we had to have a major relook at all the costs in order to bring it back into line with our expected budget. So you notice straight away the roof. That's been significantly altered. That we're working now with architect Grigor Mitchell, and he, in consultation with Gokai, made this radical change, which is considerably less expensive. But importantly, we're still liking it, and it provides light and also extra height for some of the living spaces. And we thought those are really important elements for health and well-being. So we don't want to lose that. Another example to point out are the changes that were made to the covered walkway at the front. In that original design, we had what we very grandly called the cloisters, which was a glass-covered area which ran the whole length of the terrace. It was double glazed, or it may even have been triple glazed. And the reality was that that element of the build was going to cost 1.5 times one of the houses. So if it was the houses we wanted, it had to go. And actually there were other issues with it about fire regulations that were being questioned. So that was fine. We decided that was we'd have to lose the cloisters. They were downgraded to an internal street. And then actually now it's become a covered walkway. But it still essentially is going to protect residents as they walk between the houses and get to the shared area, which is in the middle, like the common area. But I think probably we'll need to, in the winter, we'll need to have our coats and hats on going out in that bit. And actually we are hoping to have porches. Each house should have a little porch, which will help when the wind is whistling down that covered walkway. Another change from the original plan is that the terrace now has 6 homes. It's got 5 2-bed and 1 1-bed house. And that's come about because of a reduction in the size of the common house. And that was a really hard one to accept, because the common house is just central to the whole co-housing concept. But after much discussion, we've gone with that, because ultimately we want to get the houses built. And if we can achieve that, then we can work in a second phase to try and get more shared space, we're hoping to have a polytunnel, and maybe within that we can have a seating area and things like that. So summing up all these last points, a really important thing that we've learned, and something we continue have to remind ourselves of, is that don't let the perfect stand in the way of the good. And here on the left, we've got this is from a little model of the original plans with the little plastic people. And I think actually probably there's a grandchild playing with that little model now. And then on the right, we've got the covered walkway, which I think is still looking good. You see these things that look like wooden boxes, that they can be seating, but also like it's somewhere to keep our wellies. And actually in the low points of all the challenges of working on the project, sometimes just looking at the place where you're going to keep your wellies cheers you up. So I wanted to say a few things about what we hope are non-negotiable, having talked about all these cuts. And one of them is just building to the highest standard that we can afford. And this is something Nora has spoken about previously, the need to build for the life of the house. We've got one of the highest levels of fuel poverty in Scotland here in Orkney, as I think it said that in the film. And homes that are warm and well insulated and inexpensive to heat are a priority. I mean, why would you build anything else, really? And we do feel a bit optimistic because of the recent announcement that the Scottish Government in maybe 2 years' time will be looking to build everything to near passive house standards. So we're hoping we'll get support for that. Another cost saving, that's another view of the design as well. This slide shows something we're looking at now, because at the back of the terrace there are these lines which are gabions, which for anyone that's not familiar with them, I wasn't before this project, it's like big wire baskets full of stones holding back the slope, because the site is on a slope. But in that indicative tender, these were to cost £40,000. So what we're hoping is that we can get the extra bit of land up to that red line, and then it can be a more gradual slope. It won't need all this stone to hold it up. Mark is going to talk now about the thorny issue of governance.
The main point to make about governance is how difficult it is to get it right, or even to know whether you have got it right. We've had discussions about this governance from the beginnings of the project, and they continue still. In fact, we've had one today with the other members and with the project coordinator. It's often the case that we don't know what we don't know. There's no obvious template to follow for a rental co-housing initiative. In 2019, our first step, following advice from Voluntary Action Orkney, was to form a corporate entity for our group, which was basically a company limited by guarantee. But within 2 or 3 months, it was being amended to a community interest company, better to reflect our aims of benefiting the wider community and to ensure the public benefit was guaranteed. In other words, there was an asset lock. Subsequently, we're looking at a dual structure with, on the one hand, a charity and limited company, and on the other, a community interest company, basically as we are, but slightly tweaked. One of the reasons we're looking at this is because of the difference between public benefit and private benefit. Co-housing projects, as you're probably aware, don't usually qualify as charitable, as their members derive significant private benefit, mainly through living there. HCH, which is as a kick, protects and provides public benefit from several reasons. It offers affordable rental housing, which is open to a wide group of people. It has an asset lock, but with this comes some tax problems. In essentially corporation, we become liable for corporation tax. There's limits to potential funders, and we've still got the question of private benefit within that organisation alongside the public benefit. The dual structure route to public benefit has been picked up by one or two co-housing initiatives. Basically, you can have a community land trust or community benefit society, such as your space is using, a model that your space is using, and a separate housing or co-housing body beside it. What we're doing is rather different, which is exploring setting up a community-led housing charity that owns the land and the buildings and receives the rent. Because it's getting the rent, then we lose the problem of corporation tax by and large. It will be a vehicle for other local community-led housing projects to access funding and to avoid tax issues. The focus of the kick, with membership restricted to tenants, will be the management of the co-housing scheme, which would probably also include allocations. Whoops, is that in the right place?
Yep.
Basically, what we've been had to do was to think about the various organizational dimensions that were going to affect the way we could operate or wanted to operate, so that we used these headings basically to complete what we grandly called a matrix. I think it's probably just a chart or something, which was suitability, charitable status, tax efficiency, voting patterns, financial security, paperwork, and cost. And what we're going to show you is the actual thing that we prepared for ourselves, which is again also downloadable from the website. On the right, there was just some examples of organizations that are either local or that we knew. And on the left, we've got the options, which we didn't include community land trust for what we were doing. What you can see also on here was the yellow is merely things that requires professional advice. But when you start going down these columns, you start to see some of the things that we were looking for. For example, what we were looking for was having one vote per household rather than one vote per member, because it's a small organization, and would it be a small organization, and it could get slightly unbalanced if we had the one vote per member. What we're also looking at is obviously the tax area, so that we were subject to corporation tax, but if it's a charity or not, if you in a community benefit society, you need to have a rigorous regulator to avoid corporation or other taxes. And the common way of doing it is becoming a registered social landlord, which has its own problems. At the bottom, we were thinking that we probably should have a SCIO as a dual organisation initially. And we completely overlooked this in thinking that, lenders might be cautious to lending to SCIOs because there's no public register of charges. So we spent 2 or 3 months heading down that route, and then one of the potential lenders said to us, can you handle floating charges? And of course, the answer was no. So we've now moved to a model which is a company limited by guarantee, that's a registered charity on one side and the current kick on the other side. So we're going to hand back to Kath now.
Just to say, we're finishing here with another photo of Hope Cohousing members. I realised we've actually only got quite a limited number of photos of us, and the observant may realise from the clothing that this was the same day as the photo at the beginning of our presentation. Actually getting our photos taken and giving that much needed personal touch, the faces to the story, is our least favourite task. So this was a day, it was a cold day, and we had to grit our teeth and go out and have our photo taken at various places in the village. Actually, this one's in the community garden. And as you can see, Scratch the dog was unwilling to cooperate at this point. A dozen shots later, we did manage to get her in the right position and get a photo of all of us smiling. And the image was actually used in this Press and Journal article. The next slide is just showing our website address. Thank you for listening, and we'll do our best to answer any questions.
Wow, thanks so much, Kath and Mark. That was just an amazing presentation, and what a huge effort you've put in to bring the project to this stage. I've got probably about 40 questions here. I'm just slightly overwhelmed by how much you've achieved, and maybe taking full advantage of being the host here. I will take my own question first and then hand it to the audience. It just, because from a Co-Housing Scotland perspective, you know, all these challenges that you faced are ones that every group faces across Scotland that tries to deliver a co-housing project, and they all go through the same cycle, and you can see the complexity of the hoops you have to jump through. And so what we're trying to do is produce a template so that each group doesn't have to go through this. There's a template for a co-housing project, and it may be they're slightly different in different situations, and there are, I think your model's probably going to end up in a similar place to where the Phoenix one ends up by the sound of it in Inverkeithing. But the one in Glasgow with Clachan, I think, is a different one in terms of a mutual home ownership model. And but the interesting thing, when we were in the Scottish Government Short Life Working Group and recommending that there were 4 pilot projects in Scotland, and one of them be a rural island one to test the situation of a small community. And I was just wondering how that's working, because I can see, you know, the advantages of a small community in that you're a group of people that know each other, that know the community, have a relationship with the council, and you can build that body of support that sustains you through this journey. And you have the advantage of having this dedicated rural and island housing fund from the Scottish Government that urban situations don't have the support of. But I guess the other side of that we'd thought, you know, when we were looking at this years ago, is that when you've got, you know, a co-housing community of 5 or 6, that's a small group to sustain, you know, the management of a project. And, you know, you've talked about the government's issues, and in the long term, this process of transition and turnover and residents and so on. Do you think that actually is easier for rural communities because you've got that focus and cohesion, or does it make it difficult because there's so few people to share such a complicated job? How do you find it?
I think there's advantages to both. I mean, sometimes we really wish we were a bigger group because it's such a lot of work shared between so few people. But I mean, there again, it's easy to call a meeting and we all sit around a kitchen table. You know, it's it is just the size that fits our situation, really, our village, and it can easily be copied for islands where again it's small communities. Yeah, I think that. Have you got anything to?
I was chair of a tenant management organisation that ran two 21-storey tower blocks in Bermondsey in London, and I think this is much easier to work, because you're working with a smaller group of people that are like-minded, in the sense that, you know, you've got the same goal. In that organisation, you've got all sorts of different goals going, and therefore to do various bits of development, you had to work very hard just to get everything together. But it does mean there's more pressure on us. So
okay, now I'm going to privilege the people who put their questions into the chat. So if anybody do have questions, do put them into chat, or you can raise your hand on the screen. So C. Taylor asked, as the council owned the land, did you ask them to be a housing partner, as they will have the housing department knowledge and so on, and, you know, as a kind of delivery partner and so on? How did that relationship with the council develop?
Were you asking, have they, sorry, I didn't really get.
Well, I think because they owned the land,
Yeah.
could they have not helped deliver the construction of the project as well, or be,
yeah, that would have been wonderful,
ongoing role rather than just sell you the land? But they were selling it to you at a lower than market value price, isn't that right?
Yes, yes, it was designated for housing. And yes, they gave us a grant to the value, what they'd said was the value of the site. So basically they're pledging that, you know, the site for us. It hasn't ever been an option that they would.
I don't think it'd be difficult to see, because the housing department is understaffed significantly, I think. And it's difficult to see. There are particular individuals that are very helpful. But at that point, I think what we're interested in is community-led housing. And
yeah,
then they weren't. One of the things I think we're interested in is how models like this could become part of a housing association and a council provision offer.
Yes, so there would be a small co-housing offer within a bigger scheme.
Particularly as we're having to build up to 2,000 new homes over the next 10 years on Orkney, because of the growing population and all the off-sea developments, etc. So we're thinking that you can slot in, you can have various types of project occurring within larger development.
I mean, working with a housing association is something we come back to time and again, because it would help. But again, just being on an island, there's one housing association, and so far they haven't been interested to work with us. Who knows in the future, or whether there's other options there.
I mean, other co-housing groups have looked to work with housing associations and found that relationship a little difficult, I think, different places. And of course, that brings you into what you were saying, Mark, about RSLs, and then they would need to own the land, and everything gets quite complicated as well, and around the financing. Okay, coming back to the questions then. Do you speak about the environmental aspects of the design, and you wanted to have very energy efficient homes, and you've talked a bit about the climatic exposure. I think from the look of your site, you must face pretty much into the southwest, into the wind coming off the Pentland Firth there. How are you looking to achieve that? And I guess it comes into when you originally approached the council, they already had a relationship with Aberdeen University, which is where Gokai was that started to produce the design. Was that just luck that that worked out as an existing situation? You could take the opportunity.
It was completely luck. The guy, Luke Fraser from the housing department of the council, who we spoke to initially, was very enthusiastic about what we were doing. And then he arranged for us to meet Gokai because they were planning a project in Stromness, looking at older people's housing within, I think, a student housing area as well. So we were just very lucky that we were a group that was already formed with a vision of what we wanted to do. Yes, and that was how we got involved with the university and with the architect. You pressed something.
Mute yourself.
Mute myself. Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting, and I know there's a number of architects in the audience, was your relationship with the design team as that's progressed through the project, because it's kind of transitioned from Gokai onto the current architects that's gone through the different stages of development. Did you find that going through that process of the initial sort of feasibility work and then design, and those changes that you've had to make along the way, did you find that process of having a responsibility in the design process, which tenants don't normally have, that was actually an empowering thing because it made you think about the different values, the different things, and what your priorities were, and the different costs of things? Or did you find there was really just a difficult, painful experience, and everybody had different views of things?
No, I think it's been a really positive experience. Yeah, and just made it much more exciting to be involved in that, and to, initially we had conversations with Gokai about what we were wanting and our vision for how we'd be living, and then he went away and came up with various options. At each stage he sort of discussed things with us. He came up to Orkney and did presentations to the council with us. And then it was just through one of the big funding competitions we were entering that it became necessary. I can't remember the details, but it was no longer possible for Gokai to be the architect if we were going to go for that big scheme. So then he handed over to Grigor, and that's been equally great working with him. He's been up and met with us, and yeah, it's been really good.
Yes, and I mean, it's been interesting. I mean, it's been fascinating to see how the architects work. So being sort of quite ignorant about that area. So, and also we've had a lot of input into to what's going on. Whether it's socket height or different materials. The roof, what materials to put on the roof, what level of insulation to have. The key thing is, as you know, it is that both Grigor and Gokai were passive house experts. So it's been interesting to see how you can minimize some of the other things around the housing, around different types of heating, etc., because you get such efficiency within the house.
Mm.
I've pinned Margaret because she had a question. Maybe you could ask. If you unmute yourself, Margaret, you could ask your question. You need to unmute yourself.
Ah, excellent. Oh no, she's muted. She's gone back again.
Margaret, could you unmute yourself, please?
Can you hear me now?
That's it.
Yes.
Sorry about that. The presentation that you made to the council initially, was were you invited to make a presentation, or did you ask to make a presentation? And who was there? How did you get the relevant stakeholders round the table?
We asked if we could, but I think the key there was that we had Luke Fraser in the housing department, who then rallied everyone round and said, this is a really great project, you should come in. And people kind of just from all the through the council came, and Orkney Health and Care, there was a good audience for it and a lot of enthusiasm. Yeah.
So you had a champion. One
In
of the officers in the council was a champion for it.
Yes, yes.
And if I can ask another question, if I can be and ask about, could you say a bit more about the Scottish Government's bringing in passive house standards for housing as universal? Did I hear you properly?
Well, I wonder if anyone else knows more about that. It's just something we've heard in the news, that's going to come in. Tom, do you know?
I think that's right. It's 2 or 3 years away, but it will be a mandatory requirement for housing to be built to passive house standard. So that is on its way. There was a question back here from Georgie, who was asking about how you make your decisions as a group.
Well, I suppose there again, being a small group, that's really just happened quite naturally. We haven't had any very formal plan about it, but just that we all listen to each other, and if there's disagreements, talk things through. But we actually haven't really disagreed on things. I mean, the whole endless discussions on the governance, there's not really disagreements, but there's different levels of understanding. So we're just ploughing on with the help actually of the project coordinator to express our worries and then focus on, well, so how can we solve those worries and move forward? You know, so I think being a small group is actually quite an advantage for that.
Mm-hmm. I'll bring in Robin now to ask his question, because it's relevant to you know where we are with the Phoenix project and looking at the financial model for that as being a mixture of in effect rented or in effect bought, although you're buying shares in the community interest company, and the financial model is very much dependent on how much you have to borrow and the relative interest rates. With yours being entirely rented, I wonder how that's affected you, but maybe that's just kind of a lead in to allow Robin. David, if you can unmute Robin to ask his question.
Hi, maybe unmuted myself, have I?
Ah.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Kath and Mark. Yeah, no, it's very interesting to hear. I suppose my question surrounds just the complexities or otherwise of the differences between it being rented at the end of the day, and if you think it would have been a much more straightforward exercise if the individuals owned the properties at the end of it. So I mean, obviously that requires you know, equity, etc., or borrowing. But yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, it certainly would have been much more straightforward if we'd gone for the owned. But what we wanted was to open up so that co-housing was available to everyone, irrespective of their financial situation. So we had a group with a mixture of people who would be able to buy in and some who wouldn't. And we just decided quite early on that it should be rented. That, yeah.
I think in a funny sort of way, rental is much easier because particularly with relation to the land, in that we can get a piece of land for £30,000 from the council, and they give it to us because we're rental. They wouldn't be doing the same for development. Sorry, capital development. So
yeah, I mean,
problems have come because a lot of them because it's all new. Nobody's done it before.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's interesting because we're looking at this with the Phoenix project, where we want exactly the same, you know, people's ability to be part of the co-housing community to be irrespective of wealth, and that can change through time and people's circumstances will change. But that you want, for people that are selling their home and have savings to invest, we wanted to try and allow them to invest that as an investment in social capital rather than financial capital. So they buy shares in the community and interest company, which mutually owns the whole property, and it just means they don't pay the rent, and then they can get their value of their shares back at the end, but they don't get, you know, it's not an increase in value, it's just retaining that, and it means the company doesn't have to borrow the money at some variable market interest rate. But yeah, it's a more complex having that dual model.
I see the comment there just on the common spaces and common upkeep. I think that's a very useful point, because if you're all individually investing into it, you know, with a shared ambition, is how is that funded? You know, when you've got to potentially secure lending individually. So I think that's a very useful point. And yeah, I suppose the interesting thing is trying to find like-minded people, which is where you start. That was starting off. That's the incredible thing about your journey, is that you were all there together doing it. We're looking at a project just now where we want to bring co-housing plots forward, but we're not sure of the appetite of people that are there who would want to do almost a shared development. So it's always beneficial to have people already connected. And yeah, I think your other point about the land as well is important, because I think the one benefit, I'm sure others are involved in these things, but the potential to avoid the housing developer making profit off a development and holding that into the development to improve the quality of it. I think that's where the opportunity is. But yeah, thank you.
I wonder, kind of leading on from that, whether we could talk a little bit about the other aspect of your model, which is it's age specific to older people. And is that just because you were a group of chums that all happened to be of a similar age, or was it because there wasn't housing for older people that allowed you to stay in the community where you felt at home, and your needs were changing? And some of the stuff you talked about in the film, but I'm wondering, because I see Louisa Turner's here from Generations working together, and about, is there an aspect where there are other housing needs among other age groups in the community? Or whether, you know, how you see, obviously you see that as a strength and a need, but are you concerned about that as time goes on and issues of transition and succession management?
I think one of the things is that we've got an aging population here. People live longer in Orkney than most places in Scotland as well. And there is a serious lack of decent property, adequate, accessible property, certainly on our island, but I think broadly across Orkney. And so we live in a house that's got 2 foot something stone walls and is freezing. And that's quite common. And similarly, a lot of the newer builds are cold because they're not being done to the right sort of standards, or they have steps up to them and all these sorts of things. So I think we just thought there's a need here. In a way, emotionally, I prefer it if we were mixed ages, you know, different generations, etc. If you were doing a bigger scheme, that's what you would do. But we went for something that we thought was manageable.
And it did come out of the need, yeah. Just friends talking about worries, you know, as you get older, about housing. Yeah.
Louisa, do you want to come in and ask or say something about this? Don't want to bully you to ask a question.
No, no, it sounds really, really encouraging. And as you say, it is a small development if there's just 5 of you there. And it is a flagship development as well. So I did read in one of your other websites in the Hope Cohousing Scotland that there is an intergenerational project, you know, in the offering in the future. So that would be where we would come in to support that if anybody wanted to support. And I do appreciate it's the ageing population. I would just be concerned that you'd become isolated with just the one age range in your development. But the development is within a village as well, isn't it? So
it is, yeah.
It is a case that I don't know the island very well, and so I don't know the population and whether there are children that could mix or young people that could mix with you in your shared space.
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, I think those are some of the things we've talked about. For example, having the polytunnel that the school children who are just down the road, village school, could be invited in. I think because we're all from this area as well, we've got the links to our community at different ages. Yeah, so I don't see that as a problem. We definitely wouldn't be isolated, not in this case anyway.
We've got a 5-minute neighbourhood.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
5, you know, like it's two minute there. That site is two minutes to the doctors, 2 minutes to the shop, 2 minutes to the bus stop. You know, so
That's great.
And there's lots of young people, for example, hanging about. Essentially, well, lots.
In proportion. In proportion.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And sort of like my organisation, Generations Working Together, can support any specific projects, you know, like your polytunnel, like your gardening group, when it comes to nutrition as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Can anybody else have any questions? Put up your hands or pop it into the chat. I just want to, Kath, you've mentioned the sort of the Health and Social Care Partnership, or a slightly different name. Were they significantly involved, or how did that come through? Was that really just through the local authority?
They haven't been involved. They've shown support, said it's such a great idea. I would say it hasn't really gone beyond that. We're keeping them updated, and as we move on to the next significant stage, we're going to do another series of presentations locally to update the council and health and social care.
And I think you mentioned that part of the work with GoHi was about introducing technology to support older people in home, and the issue about monitoring movement and so on. How do you see that side of sort of technological artificial intelligence support, as opposed to just bringing people together and stopping being isolated? And even though you may have lost your shared spaces, you're next door to each other and you have this covered outdoor space and the shared landscape. Is one more important than the other, or really the two part of the same things?
I think they're probably two parts of the same thing. I mean, in the old-fashioned way, I think we would manage without the technology. You know, if you didn't see your neighbour, if she hadn't drawn her curtains, you would go in and see, was she okay? Whereas the technology was things like if you hadn't moved about in your house for a certain number of hours, then an alarm would go off, and the same, it would alert somebody that maybe you were lying on the floor. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm suspicious of it because of the surveillance society, and when you think what data is being freely given by these subsystems, whether it's speaking to the TV or whatever, it's an interesting. There's an interesting ethical and political question around it.
There are debates that we would have in the future, aren't there, before it was installed, and we were going to be like guinea pigs really to see how efficient these systems were.
Okay, now I see Carol's got a hard question for you here. Carol, do you want to come in and ask the question?
I could. Hi.
Hi, Carol.
It's not lovely to be on screen with you and to meet Mark, the silent partner here. Not so silent tonight, thankfully. Yes, I was wondering what kind of a dilemma will it be a dilemma for you when these? What did you say? There were 5 different firms that you had sent the information to for bidding on the build. What other factors beside the actual cost or the offer that they make? How will you decide that amongst your group?
Well, luckily, we've got somebody who will do it for us, and it's some kind of complicated system of different, what are they called? So it's not necessarily all on cost. You've got to decide about the quality of the build and whether you could, what other things? I can't remember.
We have a surveyor that will advise us of quantities. I don't know what sort of surveyor.
Yeah, I think.
And also the people from Community Housing Trust are experts at this area. So we'll be listening to what they say. But it's then us thinking what a priority on what we're going to prioritize.
Yeah. That's what I'm wondering.
And particularly around insulation, I think would be an interesting one for build approach to the building. So,
yeah.
But won't that be specified in your what you put out to tender?
In the hundreds of pages of the tender. Yes.
It has. But there will always be people that seek to push those things.
I can see the architects are all wondering about forms of contract and how your cash flow projections are managing, because until your rents start coming in, you've got to presumably borrow a lot of money up front to finance the construction. And yes, cash flow, but without the kind of the council or a housing association carrying that role. So is the co-housing take the client for the construction phase directly then with the contractor?
Well, isn't that the Communities Housing Trust guy?
Yes, the Community Housing Trust will carry on the negotiations, but it is us that carries it's the money load is us.
So maybe just clarify that, because I don't think we've mentioned this before. The Communities Housing Trust has a role in supporting you in this project.
They will be managing the build.
And do you want to just tell us a little about who they are for those who don't know?
Well, they support community-led housing projects, mostly in the Northern Islands, and then there's the Southern group, a Southern body who supports ones in Southern Scotland. We've sort of been for a long time on the verge of getting their help, but because we've got a project coordinator, we're going as far as we can with her before we have to employ the Communities Housing Trust, don't we? And they will then take over the manage of the build. Yeah. So they've got the expertise. They've set up community-led housing projects before, basically.
Yes,
Right.
basically we're going, I mean, the finance will be Islands Housing Fund, a mortgage, and then some additional grants and possibly some support from
The council.
the council. Question mark. It's not.
Okay, I've been slipping up on my questions in the chat now, so maybe an easier one now. Jan Dyer, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Okay, thanks. I've been to some of these Zoom meetings before and heard about Hope. I've always been really interested in your particular project, especially as it's for women. So I was wondering whether there has been any local opposition, because you're all women, and also from younger people who are questioning why they can't be involved as well. And I'm mainly asking this because the older women's co-housing complex in Bahai Barnet, new ground,
Yeah.
it took them 17 years to get permission
Yeah.
before they opened 6 years ago. It was very, I don't know whether any of you saw the Growing Up programme by Kathy Burke a few days ago, and she very briefly visited New Ground and spoke to Shirley, who was the founder of New Ground, who unfortunately died in December. But the opposition from the local community was quite strong, especially from men who were saying, why are we being excluded from this? And it took a lot of good PR and getting the local people on their side before they were able to actually build it and open it. And you could see from the programme, it's absolutely beautiful. I visited Shirley, because she's an old friend of mine, last year, and she showed me around. And
it's an inspiring project.
It's stunning. And there are 26 women living there. And yeah, it just
I think
wonderful.
Several of us had read about Ouch, and you know, that they featured in our original conversations about, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could do something similar? But I have to say, ours isn't women only.
Oh right,
Two of us have got partners.
Okay.
Two of us have got male partners. Mark's one of them. Yeah.
Right, okay.
But I think also that if you look at the community organisation, classically, you saw there was the craft co-op featured, predominantly women, nearly all women running that. The village hall, which is next door, there might be two males involved in that, the rest are women. So that it's the Marengo Garden, community garden, which a couple of the people involved in actually set up the community garden. That's nearly all women again. So
that is maybe the way of things. It tends to be women organising.
Yeah.
There's a whole load of research on this about how women are more efficient and effective in collaborative roles. And, you know, I did speak to some of the people at Ouch, as it was called then, about the reason for being women only. There were a number of reasons. Maybe we don't want to share in a recording just now of their experiences of men in group settings. But I think, you know, the proof is in the pudding. You have women in leadership role, and they've led you, you know, on a very successful journey. And there's stuff going on in the chat here, and I'm going to try and post a link in there. Georgie, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, it was simply because you've talked about your project coordinator.
Yeah.
And obviously they're a very important person. Can you say more about like how you recruited them and what they do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, that again was really just very, very lucky for us. Our project coordinator is the daughter-in-law of one of the members of the group. So originally, when we started off, she was on maternity leave, and we just met her around the kitchen table to talk about what we were trying to do. And immediately she was inspired, and she started saying, oh, well, you know, this would be a good way forward, and drawing out tables of, you know, risk assessments. And So it wasn't all that long after that. We'd been talking about we need a project coordinator. Oh, how should we advertise for one, and writing out a job description. And then we just thought, look, we've got one right in front of us who will do the job perfectly. So that was how we came upon Sasha. Yeah.
And she's got a financial background, which is particularly helpful. I mean, and then also involved in both projects. So it's been very good.
And what does she do on a day-to-day basis? What are her tasks?
For us, or I mean,
but no, what does she do?
Well, that is her job. She
in her project coordinator role.
She works for various different community and businesses.
But for us, she's
for you.
Basically dealing with the surveyor, dealing with the architect. I mean, we will talk to the surveyor or architect, but actually we tend to push it through Sasha, so there's one voice going through to the various people that we're trying to deal with, even the John at the community housing trust, all through Sasha. And so she manages them for us.
Brilliant. I think I've just we'll just bring things to a conclusion. I see Robin's having to go and tuck his kids in to bed. There was a question here from Kate. I just before that, maybe inviting. I've popped into the chat here the link to join Co-Housing Scotland, which if any of you want to continue these conversations on or just hear about other things that are going on, it's entirely free to join, although we do welcome donations. And it's, there are opportunities to carry forward maybe some more of these focused discussions through that, and you'll get the newsletter, and we're also on Facebook and so on. So I think, that we will always welcome increased membership and to pick up on some of these ongoing threads of conversations. We have these webinars every month or two, and I think the next one will either be with somebody from a co-housing group elsewhere in Europe, or possibly Clachan over in Glasgow. But maybe to take Kay's final question, which I think is a good one to wrap things up. Is Kay still here? Have we lost? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah. Thanks very much for sharing your experiences, Kath and Mark. I mean, I'm in total awe of you, what you've managed to achieve so far, and that you've kind of, it's obviously been a hard process these years. So just, is there anything in retrospect that you would say, to stop us going down the wrong route or whatever? Is there anything that you know now that you didn't know then that would mean you would do things differently if you'd known better?
There's so many things of wrong paths we went down. I suppose that's why Mark is all the time working on the website, trying to put up information about, things we've discovered, or just like that matrix that we showed, because that is a major problem, that knowing what's the right path to take. Don't think I can just choose one particular thing, although we spoke about the skio, but I think that's always been part of what we wanted to do, is share the learning to help other groups, and hope that it'll speed up the process for other groups, because we felt at the beginning very much that they were just completely on our own. We couldn't find anyone to ask. So that's, for us, it's been great also to have contact with Co-Housing Scotland, because just to meet with people who know what you're talking about and share your dreams is really counts for a lot and keeps you going.
Okay, well, thanks very, very much for sharing your learning. It's really useful.
Yeah, really, I think, you know, from everybody here, I think would want to express that. I think, you know, you have been inspiring. The website is a fantastic resource. You know, it does explain the project very well, and your journey and your contribution to Co-Housing Scotland has been immense as well. And I'm sure we all wish you the very best with your tender returns when they come through, that you don't find that next step too challenging, and that you will, you know, at a later stage, come back and share the construction process experience with us as well. So just to draw this session to a close, to thank you again very much, and if everybody wants to share their thanks as well.
Thank you.